9 accidents, each one a failure that should never have happened. These are the worst roller coaster disasters ever recorded, and the decisions that caused them. Starting with a boy from St. Louis who just wanted to ride one attraction before the night was over, and the series of decisions made by park employees that killed him. Accident 1. Tyree Sampson, Icon Park, Orlando, 2022. On March 24, 2022, 14-year-old Tyree Sampson traveled to Icon Park in Orlando with his football team.
He had already been turned away from 2 rides that evening because of his size.
At 6 feet 5 inches tall and 340 pounds, he was a large kid for his age. But he was still a kid, an 8th grader on a team trip trying to have a good night. Around 11:30 p.m., he was allowed to board the Orlando FreeFall, the world's tallest freestanding drop tower at 130 meters, which had only been open for 3 months. The ride ascends to 430 feet, tilts passengers forward 30 degrees at the top, then drops them at 75 miles per hour toward the ground before magnetic brakes engage. For Tyree, something was wrong from the moment he sat down. He was visibly uncomfortable in his seat. The vehicle ascended anyway. At the top, it unhooked and began its freefall. Approximately 5 seconds and 400 feet into the descent, Tyree slipped through the gap between his seat and the shoulder harness and fell to the ground. He died from his injuries that same night. The investigation that followed revealed a chain of failures that went all the way back to deliberate modification of safety equipment. The standard restraint opening on seats at that ride measured 3.33 inches. The restraint on Tyree's seat had been manually adjusted to 7.19 inches, more than double. The proximity sensor that was supposed to detect whether the restraint was correctly locked had also been manually loosened, adjusted, and retightened in a way that made it register a green safe-to-operate light even though the seat was not secure. The ride ascended with all lights showing green because an employee had modified the sensor to lie. The ride's operating manual explicitly stated a maximum weight limit of 286 pounds and instructed operators to turn away any guest who did not fit properly within the seat contours and bracket. Tyree weighed 340 pounds. He had been turned away from 2 other rides at the same park that same night. The drop tower operator let him board anyway, and then modified the restraint to accommodate him. His family filed a lawsuit against Icon Park, the ride operator, and the manufacturer. The Orlando FreeFall was ultimately dismantled and removed from the site entirely. A wooden roller coaster that broke records when it was built, collected lawsuits from the beginning, and finally sent 27 people to the hospital when a support beam cracked in half during operation. Accident 2. Son of Beast, Kings Island, Ohio, 2006. Son of Beast, at Kings Island in Mason, Ohio, was built in 2000 for $20 million and immediately announced itself as something different. The first wooden hypercoaster to exceed 200 feet. A 118-foot vertical loop, travel speeds of 78 miles per hour, 7 world records set at opening. It was the most ambitious wooden roller coaster ever constructed, and it started causing injuries before the first full season was complete. Track and sensor malfunctions appeared in year 1. The ride became notorious for its roughness and jolting. In 2001, 2 separate incidents left, one rider with a broken vertebra and another with a broken neck. In 2003, a rider with a back injury was hospitalized, but investigations attributed the injuries to pre-existing conditions rather than design flaws, a conclusion that would later look very different in court testimony. On July 9, 2006, at 4:45 in the afternoon, one of the trains cracked a wooden support beam while passing through the section called the Rose Bowl, halfway through the ride. The train made it back to the station, but the cracked beam left the track sagging. When the next train hit that compromised section, the force of the impact cracked a vertical support beam as well. The ride jolted violently. 27 people were rushed to hospital with chest and neck injuries. One rider described it as hitting a brick wall. Another said, going through the loop, she thought they were going to die. The Ohio Department of Agriculture investigation found that the wooden support beams were cracked and had splintered in multiple places, and that there was an abrupt bump in the track consistent with a pothole effect. The state investigator assigned to the case testified in subsequent court proceedings that the park had been aware of these structural problems for years and had addressed them with what he called Band-Aid fixes, patching individual sections without ever treating the underlying structural problem. He testified that the track exhibited excessive lateral motion, that bolt holes were worn, that connections had loosened, and that fixing problems in one section simply transferred the stress to adjacent sections. Jennifer Wright, one of the 27 victims, took the park to court specifically because she wanted the investigators' findings to become public record rather than disappear into a private settlement. She said she would feel like garbage holding on to information while someone else got seriously hurt. Eventually, she accepted damages on the condition that the testimony went on the record. Son of Beast never ran again. In 2012, it was demolished at a total loss to the park, estimated at $10 million. Not a mechanical failure, not operator error. A 44-year-old woman standing in line, who had nothing to do with the ride's operation, and got hit in the back of the head by a piece of metal that detached from a passing train. Accident 3. Top Thrill Dragster, Cedar Point, Ohio, 2021. The Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, launched in 2003 as the tallest and fastest roller coaster in the world, 420 feet high. 0 to 120 miles per hour in 3.9 seconds. On August 15, 2021, Rachel Hawes was standing in line waiting to ride. She never got on. As one of the trains completed its descent, a metal bracket detached from the back of a roller coaster car and flew through the air, striking her in the back of the head. Her father, standing nearby, watched a black square-shaped object fly from the ride and hit his daughter. She collapsed, screaming. The metal component was an L-shaped proximity flag plate, roughly the size of an adult male hand, bolted to the rear of the car and designed to hover over the track, communicating position data to the operating system. During the 420-foot descent, the bracket and half its securing bolts detached and became a projectile moving at the speed of a coaster that had just launched from 0 to 120 miles per hour. Rachel Hawes was taken to hospital with what her family described as a brain injury. She was in the ICU in critical condition. What happened to her after that has never been publicly confirmed. Her family requested privacy and no further updates were released. The investigation found that the bolts securing the bracket had been intact on the morning of the incident but had failed by instantaneous overload fracture at some point between morning checks and the accident. Maintenance records showed that staff had replaced missing bolts on this same ride twice in the months leading up to the incident and had performed brake repairs 2 days before the accident. The ride had also been the subject of prior debris-related incidents, including, in 2004 and 2016, riders were hit by fragments from a fraying launch cable. Following the 2021 incident, Top Thrill Dragster was permanently retired after 18 seasons. Cedar Point announced in 2023 that the ride would be completely overhauled with a new launch system and reopened under the name Top Thrill 2. A 12-year-old girl who drove from Florida to Wisconsin to ride a specific attraction she had seen on television, and an operator who let go of her before the safety net was in place. Accident 4. Tegan Marty, Terminal Velocity, Wisconsin Dells. Tegan Marty was 12 years old when she saw Terminal Velocity on cable television, a ride at Extreme World Adventure Park in Wisconsin Dells where participants were dropped from more than 30 meters, approximately 9 stories high, into a net below with no safety belts. Her parents drove the family from their home in Florida to Wisconsin specifically, so Tegan could experience the ride she had watched on television. Her mother recognized the ride operator at the entrance. He was the same person who had appeared on the TV segment promoting its safety despite the complete absence of conventional safety restraints. When it was Tegan's turn, her father began filming, and her mother watched from below. Tegan climbed to the top 30 meters above the ground and jumped. The operator released her before the safety net had been moved into position below. Tegan hit the concrete. The fall broke her spine and pelvis, caused head trauma, lacerated her liver, spleen, and bowels. She was airlifted to hospital and spent an extended period on a ventilator in critical condition. Doctors warned she might be permanently paralyzed. For a period of time, the only way she could communicate was by blinking, once for yes, twice for no. 17 months later, Tegan walked through the halls of the hospital that had treated her, using a walker for support, attending an event to promote the expansion of that same facility. She had survived. The operator, 33-year-old Charles Carnell, told prosecutors he had blanked out and released her without waiting for the all-clear signal. He was charged with first-degree reckless injury carrying a potential 25-year prison sentence and a $100,000 fine, an 11-year-old boy on a birthday trip with his family, a raft that should not have been back in service, and safety gates chained shut when the ambulance arrived. Accident 5. Michael Jaramillo, Adventureland, Iowa, July 3, 2021. The Jaramillo family visited Adventureland Amusement Park in Iowa to celebrate the upcoming 16th birthday of their son David. Michael was 11. The family boarded boat number 2 on the Raging River ride, a raft-based rapids attraction that had operated at the park since 1983. What they did not know was that boat number 2 had been removed from service earlier that same afternoon because of a deflated bladder, repaired, and returned to operation without adequate testing. The ride had passed inspection the day before, but on the afternoon of July 3rd, the Jaramillo family noticed their raft was filling with water as they moved along the course. The boat hit rocks along the route and flipped over. David Sr., the father, became trapped between the capsized raft and rocks and broke his shoulder trying to free himself and his sons. Michael and his brother David Jr. were trapped underwater in the upside-down raft, held in place by their seatbelt restraints, unable to release them. Their parents shouted for help from the banks. Another boat came down the river and struck the upturned raft. Bystanders and workers from a nearby fireworks setup who heard the screaming jumped in to help. When 911 was called, the emergency response was delayed by multiple compounding failures. The emergency access gates were chained shut. A second access gate was completely blocked by equipment set up for the park's 4th of July fireworks display. The ambulance could only reach within 100 meters of the site, adding critical minutes to response time. When emergency personnel finally reached the ride, the water had not fully drained from the trough despite the emergency stop having been activated, leaving 60 centimeters of water surrounding the upturned raft where the boys were trapped. The family estimated Michael and David Jr. were submerged for approximately 10 minutes. Michael died the following day. David Jr. spent a month on life support, was initially unable to see or speak after emerging from a medically induced coma, and gradually recovered his vision, speech, and mobility. The subsequent investigation found 17 safety violations related to the ride. The raft repairs had been performed using Flex Seal, a consumer television infomercial product, instead of professional repair materials. Air pressures in the bladders were inadequate. Weirs had been replaced with incorrect parts. The evacuation route had not been updated to reflect changes made to the park's layout. The fireworks equipment blocking emergency access had been set up directly over the designated emergency vehicle pathway. A veteran who had lost both legs serving in Iraq and just wanted to ride a roller coaster with his children. Park employees put him on without a safety belt and told him to hold on with his hands. Accident 6. James Hackemer, Darien Lake, New York, 2011. James Hackemer was an Iraq war veteran who had lost both legs when his vehicle struck an improvised explosive device during his service in 2008. On July 9, 2011, he visited Darien Lake Amusement Park in upstate New York with his children and his sister. When he expressed his wish to ride the Ride of Steel roller coaster, park employees were unable to secure a safety belt on him because of his double amputation. Rather than declining to allow him on the ride, they seated him in the front coach and told him he could hold on to the barrier in front of him with his hands. The Ride of Steel travels at 80 kilometers per hour. During one of the turns, Hackemer was thrown from the seat. His nephew Ashton, who was with him that day, said park employees asked no questions and raised no objections to Hackemer's determination to ride. His sister Jody told the Associated Press that in that moment on that ride, he probably felt the happiest and most normal he had felt in 3.5 years. State investigators ruled operator error as the cause, and the ride returned to operation that same year. At number 7, a 17-year-old who climbed 2 fences into a restricted zone at Six Flags over Georgia. The foot of a passing passenger hit him at 80 kilometers per hour, and the result was instantaneous. Accident 7. Asia Ferguson, Six Flags over Georgia. In 2015, 17-year-old Asia Lashen Ferguson from Springfield climbed over 2 fences at Six Flags over Georgia, both approximately 2 meters tall, both marked with signs clearly identifying the area beyond as a dangerous restricted zone. The most likely explanation offered by witnesses was that he was trying to retrieve a hat that had blown off his head during a ride. Other witnesses suggested he intended to grab the feet of passengers as a train passed overhead. Whatever his intention, the outcome was the same. The foot of a passenger in a coach moving at 80 kilometers per hour struck him in the head almost immediately after he cleared the second fence. The blow was immediately fatal. Six Flags closed the ride for the day and reopened it the following morning. A woman who told the operator she was worried about her safety belt before the ride began. The operator told her it was secured. She was flung 23 meters into the air and her body was found wrapped around a hinge. Accident 8. Rosie Esparza, Six Flags, Texas. 2 years before the Asia Ferguson incident at Six Flags, the company was involved in another fatal accident at its Texas location. On a day in 2013, Rosie Esparza boarded the Texas Giant roller coaster at Six Flags over Texas with her family, including her daughter. Before the ride started, Esparza expressed concern to the operator about whether her safety belt was properly secured. The operator confirmed it was, and the ride began. When the coaster made a sharp turn, Esparza's restraints loosened, and she was thrown 23 meters into the air. Her partially torn body was found wrapped around a hinge on the roof of the Honky Tonk Tunnel. 2 months later, the ride was back in operation, with new restraints installed. Esparza's family sued Six Flags and the manufacturer Gerstlauer. Both companies countersued each other over liability. Eventually, both reached an undisclosed settlement with the family. The accident led to specific safety modifications on the Texas Giant, but Six Flags faced persistent criticism over the speed with which the ride returned to service, the single deadliest roller coaster accident in history. 5 children killed, a wooden ride whose haulage rope broke at the top and whose brakes failed on the way down, and a 14-year-old girl who watched everything from a carriage, 15 meters in the air. Accident 9, the Big Dipper. Battersea Park, London. The Big Dipper at Battersea Park in South London is the deadliest roller coaster accident in recorded history. On a day in 1972, the wooden roller coaster was being hoisted to the start of its run when the haulage rope broke loose from one of the carriages. The braking mechanism failed. The wooden train was traveling above the park with 31 passengers on board. Carolyn Adamczyk was a 14-year-old schoolgirl on the ride. She turned around and watched the operator hitting the brakes that were not working. Most carriages failed to take a turn and one jumped the rails entirely, crashing into a wooden fence. The train then took a sharp turn and collided with another train waiting in the boarding zone. 5 children died. 13 more received severe injuries. Carolyn Adamczyk survived, trapped in a relatively intact carriage 15 meters above the ground. The Big Dipper was never repaired. The Battersea Fun Fair was closed 2 years later. More than 50 years on the accident remains the benchmark against which the industry measures its worst failures. 9 accidents. 9 different chains of failure involving faulty equipment, negligent operators, deliberate safety modifications, inadequate inspections, and in some cases nothing more complicated than greed overriding the most basic obligation any business owes the people it serves. Every year, approximately 30,000 injuries occur in amusement parks across the United States alone. The industry quotes odds of 1 in 16 million for serious injury on any given ride. What those odds do not capture is how many of the incidents on this list were entirely preventable by people who either did not know what they were doing, did not care, or made a calculation that the cost of proper safety was higher than the cost of the consequences. Drop a comment telling us which case you found most disturbing, and subscribe because the full stories behind each of these accidents go deeper than any single video can cover.